today's episode, you're going to be reading a story, but first we're going to be reading the Bible, and then you're going to be doing the synopsis with Kimberly, and then you're going to be then we're going to be reading Hittite Warrior. So if you guys enjoy, make sure to like button, subscribe, and hit the bell on this video. The Hittite Warrior.
Why are you saying Hittite Warrior?
I am not sure what he's talking about. Let me turn off my notifications. There we go. Okay, so we are on Ecclesiastes chapter 3, the most famous of the chapters in the book of Ecclesiastes. I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version of the Bible. Let me begin. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceived that whatever God does endure forever, nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken away from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? That is the end of Ecclesiastes chapter 3. So, we're reading Hittite Warrior, and Uriah meets these people, and they're Christians, and they tell him all about Jesus, and that Jesus is great and wonderful. Here's Kimberly to say how it really happened.
So, what actually happened is, they were telling him about how his wife had, they were like talking, and he learned that, the guy's wife had died, and all of his other sons had died, and, he only has his youngest son and even younger daughter and his grandmother left. and they are very successful in their town, their village, and in the weaving room, I forget what it's called. He has women and children working, but he says that they said that they fed them really well, which I'm not exactly sure. But they informed us about the method of making purple dye, and it's very costly and extremely hard, which is why in the old time frame, purple dye was basically, you're rich, you can afford it, good job. And
Describe the slaves, what they did to the slaves.
they found a bunch of this special kind of snail, and the slaves they blinded them because they have to be like a very certain type of slave who's like
They have to be super strong.
Yeah, super strong slaves. So they blind them so they can't run away, and then they're just walking in circles, grinding this big grindstone, I think.
And they don't live very long.
Yeah, they don't live very long. And so he also learns that, I forget the god's name, but whatever his name is, basically demands sacrifices of firstborn sons.
Oh, Moloch.
Yeah, Moloch. He demands sacrifices of firstborn sons for... I don't even know why. But it's the rich people's sons, and he goes
It's
back...
everybody's sons.
No, it said the rich people's, I think.
Well, the rich people and the poor, yeah. Okay.
Well, there's a few other things that I missed, but okay. Bunch of backstory.
Human sacrifice.
Bet. Sorry, that's my firstborn son right there. All right, so...
Ben.
Sorry.
Something else.
All right. So, one other thing. This is really interesting how ironic it is. But the daughter, I think granddaughter actually, that Kimberly mentioned, her name is Mehiltabel. I think that's the right name. Anyway, so I was listening to my Bible in a Year podcast this morning, and we were in Genesis chapter 36. Ironically, in which the one character named Mehiltabel from the Bible was mentioned. And she was a daughter of one of the kings of Edom, the descendants of Esau. Also a descendant of Isaac. You know, he had twin sons through Rebekah, Jacob, and Esau. And so this is one of the sons of Esau. So from Genesis chapter 36, verse 39, it says, Baal-Hanan, the son of Achbor, died, and Hadar reigned in his place, the name of his city being Pau. His wife's name was Mehiltabel, the daughter of Matred, daughter of Mezahab. So not a daughter, but a wife of one of the kings of Edom, which was the descendants of Esau. So, very interesting that those two things would coincide at the same time. I absolutely believe in coincidences. Now, this is not the same character as that. It's just somebody who is named after a very extremely minor character from the Bible. All right, so here we are in chapter 6 of Hittite Warrior, the Princes and the Hittite Prince. I stayed in Tyre. I had not forgotten my promise to my father to go to Harosheth and find the man named Sisera, but I told myself I could go there at any time and would be much better prepared by what I was learning in Tyre. Besides, as long as I intended to go, I had not really broken my promise, so I pushed it out of my mind, and soon it ceased to trouble me. I learned very quickly in the house of Ethbaal, having mastered the Aleph-Beth signs, I soon learned to put them together into the words that appeared on the papyrus and tablets in the warehouse, words such as gold, silver, copper, bronze, wool, and shekels. I learned many other kinds of words, too. There was a place in Tyre where books were collected, and sometimes I went there. What I found in these tales and stories showed me a world that had gone on for thousands of years before the fathers of the Hittite lords had come down from the north and found it, and that had surely not always been the same. I read stories of great nations that had risen and fallen, and sometimes risen again under new names. Many of the stories were from Babylon. One that I read told of a great flood that had covered the world long ago. It told of a man who had been warned of the flood by the gods. So he had built an ark, and saved himself and his family, and 2 of every kind of animal, and became the father of all nations. There were books on sciences, too, the sciences of numbers, and the stars, who were, of course, the gods. One night, as I was walking past the hangings that separated the quarters of the Lady Maris from the rest of the house, I heard music, voices, and laughter coming from inside. I was curious, but did not dare enter without being invited, so I stood still and coughed as if I had taken the fever, till the hangings were pushed aside and the face of Mehetabel peered out. Come in, she said. You are just in time for the story of the princess and the Hittite prince. I entered the apartment. The little Egyptian fox dog that belonged to Mehetabel barked angrily and nipped at my ankles, but I was used to that. The grandmother sat in a reclining chair listening to the music of a flute played by a little servant girl in the corner of the room, and at her feet, to my surprise, sat Jotham. The grandmother was telling stories of her youth in Egypt. They were stories she had heard from her grandmother, and I found out later that I could have heard them nowhere else but here, for these were the stories of the accursed city of Akhenaton on the Nile, and the accursed Pharaoh with his one god. Akhenaton, And these stories had long been forbidden by law. The Lady Maris did not think that the Pharaoh was accursed. His wife was the most beautiful of the women, she was saying. Nefertiti, the beautiful lady, they called her. He went nowhere without her, and their 6 little girls thought it no disgrace, and if the children laughed in the temple of the one God, she and Pharaoh would laugh too, even as they silenced them, and the temple was light and open to the sun. Who was the one God? I asked her. Aton, the light of the sun, they called him, she replied, but he was Adonai, the Lord, and the Egyptians took him long ago from Canaan. Pharaoh said there was no other but him, that he was the Lord of truth, and he moved his court from the city of the false gods and built the city of Akhenaton. No one may live there now. The priests destroyed him and his god and his city. The beautiful lady was banished from the courts and saw it all happen, but she lived to be old. The Lady Maris paused to preen herself a little, a look of pride on her face. Once she visited the family of my grandmother. It was a great honor. She gave this to a woman of our family, and she showed us the small image of a beautiful, delicate face. This is the beautiful lady. It was made for her in her youth by an artist from Crete, who was one of the greatest of them all. I examined the beautiful face carefully, but Jotham looked only at Mehetabel. Mehetabel smiled at him, then spoke to her grandmother. Tell him the story of the princess and the Hittite prince, she urged, and I looked up with a new interest. Ah, that is too sad, said the grandmother. Besides, it is the most forbidden of all. But he is a Hittite, and it will interest him, said Mehetabel. Besides, it is true. The grandmother smiled and shook her head, but did not protest again. It is the story of the second daughter of the Pharaoh of Akhenaton, for his oldest daughter and her husband were murdered by the priests even before his death. This second daughter, when Pharaoh died, was married to her father's little brother, the young Tutankhamun, hardly more than a child, and the 2 of them became king and queen. But in his 18th year the young king died. How did he die? I asked. It is said that Horemheb, the general of the armies, murdered him with poison. For Horemheb was a low-born man of great ambition who wanted to become Pharaoh. To do this, it was necessary for him to marry the young queen, and the priests approved of this, for he was a faithful follower of the old gods of Egypt. But it is said that the young queen had once met a son of Subiluliuma, the great king of the Hittites, he who conquered all of Canaan, and had loved him. She knew, too, that he was strong and brave, and would protect her against Horemheb and the false priests. So she wrote to the great Subiluliuma, saying, "Send me one of your sons, that he may be my husband, and the ruler of all Egypt." They say that the great Subiluliuma knew who it was she meant, and did send him to Egypt to be Pharaoh. And who knows, if that had happened, all the world might now be at peace and strong enough to drive out the people from the west. "Why didn't it happen?" I asked her. "Because Horemheb, that low-born general who wanted the throne for himself, heard what the princess had done, and sent murderers to meet the Hittite prince on the road and slay him, which they did. But the princess died rather than ever be married to Horemheb." "So Horemheb never became Pharaoh?" I asked hopefully. "Oh yes," said the grandmother, "for he became strong enough to take what he wanted, even without marrying into the true dynasty. But the gods punished him for his wickedness." "How?" "He never had children. When he died, his friend, the first Ramesses, became king. His descendant is on the throne now, but they were never the true kings." She lifted the little image of Nefertiti and gazed upon it. "My grandmother used to pray that some day she would stand before the true king of Egypt and give this image into his hand. Once I prayed the same myself, but I know that it will never be." Jotham, who had been listening closely, though he knew the story by heart, said suddenly to Mehetabel, "If I had been that Hittite prince, and you that princess of Egypt, I would not have let them kill me, leaving them free to harm you." "But if I had been the princess," said Mehetabel, "I would not have sent for you. I would have gone to you myself to keep you safe." And I knew that Jotham and Mehetabel loved each other. I did not understand it, for he hated her golden hairnets and headbands, and her hard-heartedness toward the sufferings of the factory slaves, and she hated his scorn of the household images and the fact that he made her think about the factory slaves at all. And so the days went by, and I began to find some happiness in Tyre. I ceased to dream of the sea people in Arzawa. I even thought that perhaps I had found safety and would be able to live out my life in peace. I did not know that a time was coming that would destroy all peace in Canaan, and I did not know that the day was coming closer when I would find myself a partner in the greatest crime known to the men of Tyre, a day that would change my life at least as much as it had been changed before. Chapter 7. The Sacrilege. The season of the winter rains drew toward its close, and the time of the death and resurrection of the god Adonai was upon us, the festival of the first fruits. The city was crowded, for many farmers and other people from out of town made it their business to come into Tyre at this time of year to take part in the religious rites. We ourselves had gone to the temple, put ashes on our foreheads, bowed our heads to the dust in the courtyard, and bewailed the death of the god. The beautifully carved and columned door of the house of Ethbaal had been dutifully smeared with the blood of a lamb, one of the firstborn of his own flocks in the country. It was on the holiest night of all that the great sacrilege was committed. It was a strange night. There was something in the air that I did not understand. I had been busy in the warehouse for the past weeks, and had paid little attention to anything outside. True, I had heard rumors and whispers here and there, 3 temple ships mysteriously lost with all their cargo, great fleets of warships massed on the shores of Crete and Achaia, a terrible insult from the Philistine ambassador to the chief of Sidon. It was, as I have said, a strange sight. Outside, from time to time, we heard the clashing of cymbals and the shrieking of pipes and voices bewailing the dead god. And inside, the household of Ethbaal sat about their evening meal and did not even taste it. I could not understand this, for I was surely hungry. I looked at them, wondering at their silence. Jotham was not there, but no one remarked upon his absence, and there was something in their faces that made me afraid. Achil, the Philistine, grows insolent, Hannibal said that night to his father. Ethbaal did not reply to Hannibal, and suddenly the young man sprang to his feet. "Why should we listen to his insolence?" he cried. "He is our servant. If it were my place, I would have him beaten and forbid him ever to set foot on our ships again." "Patience, my son," said Ethbaal. "The priests are right. A time of trouble is at hand for the land of Canaan, but we have weathered such times before with our wits and our obedience to the gods, above all with our obedience to the gods." Suddenly, Mehetabel rose from her rug. Her face was a greenish white. She sat from the common room. Ethbaal looked after her nervously, and I thought he half raised his hand as if he would make the sign against evil. "What is wrong with her?" I asked. "You must ask her," said Ethbaal. And he added strangely, "Remember that this is a holy night, and he who blasphemes in any way brings down the wrath of heaven upon his head and breaks the law of the land." He sat still on his rug, looking old and sick and sad. I still remember him like that, for though I could not know it then, that was the last time I ever saw him. I could not understand why he should have given me such a warning. I did not understand what it was that was hanging over the house. There was something in Hannibal's face that made me shy of asking him, and Jotham was not there. Later that evening I passed the fine hangings of the grandmother's apartments, heard voices within, and asked if I might enter. Mehetabel was seated by her grandmother, the little dog in her arms. It was trembling, having been made uneasy by all the noise outside. Mehetabel's eyes were red and swollen. The little servant girl was playing melodies on her flute in the corner, but no one listened to her. "Something strange is happening in this house," I said to them. "Achil the Philistine has spoken as if he were the master instead of the servant, and Hannibal looks sick. And you turn pale at the mention of the gods, and now I see that you have been crying. What is wrong?" It was the grandmother who replied, her face hard as stone. "She weeps for her cousin Jabin." "Jabin?" I thought of the spoiled, sickly-looking little boy, and frowned. "What is the matter with him?" "He is to die tomorrow when the sun is high, in the fire of Moloch, and we, like the rest of the city, must see it done." I felt as if someone had struck me a blow in the chest. Then slowly things became clear to me. The whispers and rumors about the insolence of the Philistines in Sidon, the 3 ships lost at sea, the boldness of Achil and the light in his eyes, all the activity that day near the temple of Moloch. I understood. The shadow of the sea people had gathered over Tyre and all the coast of Canaan, and they were going to try to ward it off in the ancient manner with the torture and death of a child. "The priests have said that Moloch is angry," whispered Mehetabel. "They say he must have a gift to show our love and our fear of him." The black image of Moloch rose before my eyes in all its ugliness, and I could no longer shut it out. Clumsily, I tried to comfort Mehetabel. "It may be that something will happen before tomorrow," I said. "It may be that they will relent and save him." Mehetabel looked at me with frightened eyes. "Save him," she cried, "and bring the wrath of Moloch down upon the city?" I thought of the ox carts and the chariots, the burnings and killings of the sea people at home, and said no more. "I will see it done," said Mehetabel. "All of us will see it. That is why we are favored in Canaan. That is why we have survived every trouble, because we withhold nothing from the gods, and we give our gifts gladly." Suddenly she broke into sobs and hid her face in her arms. "He is so little. He must be so frightened." The grandmother took her in his arms, but her bitter eyes were upon the little image of the beautiful lady, and I remembered that only bread and wine were sacrificed to the one god of Akhenaten. I could think of nothing to say. I wished that Jotham would come. Perhaps he would comfort her. I went through the house and into the courtyard, calling his name, but Jotham was nowhere to be found. All night the streets were noisy with passing bands of musicians, processions of priests, temple dancing girls, and celebrating people on holidays. Sometimes frenzied groups would go by the house, shrieking and slashing themselves with knives in their fervor. Toward morning, however, much of the city became silent and deserted, for all the town had flocked toward the high place where stood the holy grove of Adonai the Lord, where they would celebrate the rising of the sun and the resurrection of the God. Feeling the quiet outside, I rose from my bed and went out into the streets to walk, but I found no peace. There were still the stones beneath my feet, and the high walls of brick and stone hemming me in, and the smells of the city were still there, and there was still the thought of what would happen tomorrow in the temple of Moloch, when the sun was high. Then suddenly it was no longer quiet. A group of armed guards from the temple garrison had come into the waterfront. They asked me roughly what I was doing there. "What's wrong?" I asked them. "There has been a theft," said the captain shortly. "The warehouse of Ethbaal is to be searched. You had better come with us." The warehouse of Ethbaal? Searched? I stared at them as if they had gone mad. Search the property of Ethbaal as if it were a hut of a slave? Ethbaal is an elder, I reminded them. Have you leave to enter his warehouse? "A great thing has been stolen," said the captain grimly. "We have leave to enter anywhere, even into the house of the high priest, till it is found. Come with us." The door to the warehouse yawned like the entrance to the dark cave, and the temple guards were not anxious to enter, even with their swords and torches. They commanded me to go before them. It was dark at first, and I stumbled about among the bales, wondering if there were anything in here, and what it was we were looking for. A strange feeling had come over me, that something terrible and fearful was taking place, and not knowing what it was only made it worse. After a while, the warehouse became a little brighter from the torches, but the corners were still dark. From the first, I had a feeling that something was there that should not have been. Perhaps the guards felt the same thing and were uneasy, for they had begun to make an unnatural lot of noise, and as if to reassure each other, they moved about aimlessly, thrusting swords into bales and barrels, and shouting out threats to the unknown thief who might be hiding there. They seemed to have forgotten me. Something caught my eye. It was a movement behind one of the bales in the darkest corner of all, and my skin began to crawl. There was too much activity among the soldiers for them to notice it, and drawn by curiosity, in spite of fear, I moved toward what I had seen. A dark figure stood behind the bale. A flare of light crossed the corner, and I saw who it was. It was Jotham, and there was something with him, something small that was clinging to him and trying to hide. Then I knew what it was that had been stolen, and the hair rose on the back of my neck at the enormity of the sacrilege. I moved back, then stopped, for I saw that Jotham was holding a knife. One of the guards was coming to the corner. I turned toward him, my body shielding Jotham and the child from his sight. I felt the point of the knife at the back of my neck. "There is nothing here," I said. The guard was a nervous young man who wanted to believe me. He hesitated for a moment, and I felt my hands grow cold. One of the others called to him. "Have you found anything?" The young guard swallowed. "Nothing," he said at last, and moved away. I started to follow, but I felt an arm go tight around my neck, and again the point of the knife. "Don't move," Jotham whispered. "Let them go. You stay here." And after stumbling about for a while longer, the guards gave up. Talking among themselves in troubled voices, they left the warehouse, and I was left alone with Jotham and the child. Where did the child go?
Baby Yoda's not there today.
Where did he go? He was there. There he is. This is what Jotham. This is what Jotham had, was the child right here.
You're silly.
Not really. All right. So yeah, obviously the child named What was his name? The one that they were going to sacrifice the next day. Yamin?
Ramen.
Ramen?
Ramen.
Da-ba-da-ba-da. All right, the little boy they were going to sacrifice the next day. Yay, he gets to survive. Okay, so that's the end of where we're going to stop today.
The end of where we're going to stop.
Chapter 8.
So let's start again.
Chapter 8 is called The Boat, and the first word is Jotham. Boat. That's right. And so we will try.
Jotham isn't a word.
We will try to read 3 chapters tomorrow. We're having a semantic debate over here, and I'm going to win because I have the camera and the microphone. All right, so everyone, have a great night, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you. Good night. God bless.